Hi, my name's Steve Gowers and I lead the drug delivery business here at TTP. Today I'll be sharing some of our thoughts on the topic of sustainability of drug delivery devices, particularly as people explore reusability as an option for injectable devices. What are the potential trade-offs and critical considerations for development? Now, the topic of reusable injectors is clearly not new. Several reusable devices have been on the market for 15 or more years. I think one of the first development projects I worked on when I joined TTP 13 years ago now was actually a reusable injection device. However, what is new is some of the emerging trends that are having an unprecedented impact on our industry. As we look to the future, 30 million patients in the US alone are likely to be taking GLP-1 medications. That's 10% of the population, and potentially up to 1 billion additional injections each year, generating 35,000 tons of waste and enough devices to circle the globe 3.5 times. You can also layer on top of that the fact that we are seeing more advanced therapies and more complex formulations coming through the pipeline, which are asking more of our drug delivery devices. As we look forward, we are set to have significantly more injection devices and also potentially more complex devices. It's therefore unsurprising that we're seeing more focus on reusability and sustainability again. And I think we're going to continue to see more companies pushing into this space with new device offerings. But you never get something for nothing, and there are inevitably trade-offs. So I want to share some perspectives on things companies might do to help navigate those trade-offs. So in the next 10 minutes, I hope to cover a few things. Firstly, when it comes to improving sustainability, it's not just about reusability. There are opportunities for innovation across the spectrum of both disposable and reusable devices. When you look at reusable devices, they clearly offer unique benefits, but there are trade-offs to navigate regardless of what route you go down. I want to highlight a few of them. There are 3 things that we believe are really important, and we've developed tools to help as we've had to navigate these trade-offs on development projects over recent years. Firstly, forewarned is forearmed. So intelligent approaches can accelerate learnings from existing devices and use paradigms. Secondly, systems thinking is critical. Analytical approaches can help you balance formulation, device, and platform considerations early on in a development program. And last but not least, don't leave adherence to chance. Behavioral science frameworks can guide design, and scientific research can help predict outcomes. Convenient home administration of biologics has really driven the disposable segment of the market in recent years. Pre-filled syringes and auto-injectors have become the norm, and on-body or larger volume devices have also started to emerge as convenient options. The majority of these devices have been designed to be single-use and contain one dose of the drug. We've started to see the use of alternative bio-based polymers that have been incorporated into some designs, and we're also seeing companies explore opportunities to further reduce part count in auto-injectors and design them in clever ways to aid safe reclaim and disassembly. Reclaim and recycling schemes have started to be introduced, a good example being Novo Nordisk's Pen Cycle program. And as we look to scale approaches to circularity, we believe there are opportunities to leverage behavioral design to increase engagement and adoption of some of these schemes. Partnership considerations throughout the ecosystem will also be important if these ventures are to succeed and embed themselves in our industry. Looking to more advanced therapies, there are also opportunities to innovate whilst minimizing any additional environmental impact. For example, several companies are now looking at alternative power sources, such as compressed gas, which can potentially enable delivery of highly viscous formulations, whilst avoiding the need for expensive electronics and drive systems. The multi-dose segment has traditionally been dominated by insulin delivery, but we're now seeing GLP-1 go into multi-dose cartridges and pens. I would speculate that there are opportunities to broaden this concept to more biologics in the future. If you look to the eye care market, TTP has been at the heart of developing valving technologies to enable preservative-free multi-dose eyedroppers. and we have proprietary IP in this space. Are there things we could learn and apply to our industry that we might take from the eye care industry? So moving on to the reusable segment of the market. Although this section of the market is not as big today, it does span single-use and multi-dose designs. As you look at the range of existing devices on the market, there are various mechanical and electromechanical approaches that have been taken. From left to right, you have some different examples from across this spectrum. Mechanical devices include the NovoPen, the AutoJect 2, and the WhisperJect device. And then moving on to electromechanical, you have the Emerald Mini, the BetaConnect, and the RebiSmart devices. So if we move on to consider the potential environmental benefit that reusable devices could have, this baseline scenario shows a typical reusable electromechanical device in green versus a single-use disposable auto-injector device in yellow. The curve shows the approximate amortized carbon footprint over time for each of these devices. In this example, the break-even point is after 24 doses. Considering a medication where the patient has weekly dosing, this equates to around 6 months. But if it was monthly dosing, the patient is going to have to use the electromechanical device for at least 2 years before you even break even. Now, if we consider the example of a simpler mechanical reusable device, shown here in blue, this option may differ in terms of its potential features and benefits to the electromechanical device, but the break-even point is after just 8 doses. The two scenarios that we've talked through are all very well and good, but in reality, when you're considering people in the real world, scenarios are often more complex. What if a typical patient wants more than one reusable device? Perhaps one for the car or work. Perhaps they're worried about losing it and want a backup option to keep in the bathroom cabinet. As you might expect, this effectively doubles the time taken to break even from a carbon footprint perspective. If a patient was using an electromechanical reusable device to take a monthly dose, they would essentially have to wait up to 4 years before they broke even on the carbon footprint side of things. But what about a slightly different scenario again? Someone tries the reusable, doesn't like it, perhaps because it's less familiar or involves some extra use steps to use it. And as a result, in this scenario, the person doesn't persist with using the reusable device and moves back to the disposable format after just 5 doses. Well, if you consider the carbon footprint, now you never get to the break-even point. And after a year of monthly dosing, you've basically doubled your carbon footprint. So what do we take from all of this? Well, I think it's important to set your goals and understand the likely impact for typical use scenarios. However, it's also important to understand that in many cases, we will not be talking about those typical scenarios. On top of this, I also acknowledge that there are broader factors at play here. If we're considering environmental impact more holistically, the patient not having to travel into the hospital, adherence, are all things that reduce carbon footprint and increase outcomes. It's a complex picture. Your sustainability goals and objectives at the start of any development program should reflect this. Once you're clear on your goals, there are 3 things that we believe are important to consider as you embark upon your journey to develop more sustainable drug delivery devices. Firstly, forewarned is forearmed. We've already talked about the fact that there are many reusable devices out there and millions of patients using them each week. So before launching into any new development, I think it's critically important that we better understand their experiences of using these devices today. The FDA's MORE database is a central repository of all medical device reports and adverse events. It's a fantastic source of information, but it's notoriously difficult to interrogate. At TTP, we have a deep tech business that's doing some very clever things with use of generative AI. We set them the task of developing a tool that could directly interface with the MORE database and provide useful, traceable, and structured insights to help guide development. What they've developed uses state-of-the-art large language models to parse large data sets of failure mode data for insights. It employs a retrieval augmented generation, or RAG, LLM operating system architecture to improve accuracy, traceability, and general output quality from these searches of the MAUDE database. We're also in the process of broadening this tool so that it can interface directly with the FDA's Adverse Event Reporting System for Drugs and Combination Products, or FAERS. So we only spent a few hours using this tool to look into existing reusable injection devices, and already some strong themes started to emerge very quickly. Firstly, physical limitations. So we're often asking patients to do more physically when reusable devices are involved, and they often struggle. There's a lot of information out there on how patients struggle with existing devices, both loading, charging or priming, and disposing of aspects of these devices. Secondly, repetitive device failures. So we're asking more of these devices through their lifetime if they're reusable. They have more functions than disposable devices. They're intended to last through many uses, sometimes for more than 2 years. TTP prides itself on our approaches to probabilistic design and reliability engineering. So for durable medical equipment, you have to anticipate the worst. My background's in human factors, and I've really seen and heard it all over the years. Drops, storage, cleaning, all these things can happen. And when they do happen, the devices need to fail safe in an explainable way. Next, there's lots of insights around patient preference. If they do fail, we need to appreciate that patients will very quickly revert to a disposable device if they struggle. There are many records of patients expressing frustration and switching back to a standard auto-injector as a result. Lastly, you start to see insights around drug-device compatibility, particularly if we start seeing more reusable devices and potentially a standardized approach to primary containers to aid filling. Interchangeability becomes a potential problem with reusable devices. This has been a live issue with the FDA. Incompatibility of disposable and reusable components of a system can lead to partial or missed doses. As we consider the design of any device, but particularly reusable platform devices, the second thing to consider is that systems thinking should be a critical part of your development approach. Over the last few years, we've developed and validated a comprehensive mathematical model that helps us understand the behavior of injection systems. It allows you to consider a range of primary container and needle geometries, and also formulation properties, including non-Newtonian fluids. From a device perspective, it allows you to understand different forces and pressures required to inject over different timescales. It also allows you to get an appreciation for the shear forces that any formulation might experience in different scenarios. So how does this kind of approach help? Well, particularly in the earlier stages of a project, it allows you to quickly ask questions which explore the design space and trade-offs. There's always pressure to make a device as platformable as possible, and a model like this allows you to quickly understand different consequences of design decisions early in the process. For a reusable device, we may well be interested in how much energy or force it's likely to take to recharge or prime the device for each dose. We might have already decided upon a 27 gauge needle, and that ideally we want the injection time to be less than 10 seconds. The model then allows us to quickly explore the design space for different formulations. This informs our thinking on how a device might have to operate, and in this case, it can give you a useful steer on how much force a patient might have to put into prime a mechanical system. For a 1 milliliter dose of a formulation that's around 10 centipoise in viscosity, the 7 Newton force required is probably low enough for a patient to reset as they push a cartridge into the device. If viscosity increases to 20 centipoise, the 15 Newton force may become difficult for a user and require them to handle the device slightly differently. When we worked on the development of a microneedle applicator for rheumatoid arthritis patients, several years ago now, we found that most patients could exert around 40 newtons of force to prime that device. But this required a more bulbous ergonomic form factor, so these things might need to be considered again early on in the design process. And as you go up to higher volumes, the forces start to require longer lever arms or mechanical gearing. This may be fine, but you need to appreciate that the device may in turn become more complex and costly. So last but not least is adherence. Given we're almost inevitably asking the patient to go through more steps, we better be confident that they're going to engage with the device. For a connected electromechanical device, adherence is often one of the value propositions that people talk about from the start. So we need to be confident that we're going about designing the device in a way that patients will find it intuitive and are likely to engage with. At TTP, we've worked a lot in this space. Colleagues with backgrounds in psychology and interaction design have studied the literature over many years. There are plenty of frameworks that describe behavior that exist, and we've adapted them into formats that make it easy to drive design thinking in the early stages of development projects. Perceived ease of use and perceived value, or intrinsic and extrinsic motivation, are both important. Reusable and disposable devices drive different sides of that equation. Aspects of the model we've developed are predictive. We've taken the time to understand real-world studies that have been undertaken that measure the impact of some of these factors on real-world adherence. You can start to assess how well your device platform might perform against them, and we've quantified the likely impact on adherence. Something we've found to be a useful tool to guide thinking and decision-making early on in the design process. One final thing on this, if you consider emerging drugs like GLP-1, we're often designing for a slightly different user population, and that needs to be considered in the design process right from the outset. So, going back to some of the key learnings that I hope you'll be able to take away from this short presentation. Firstly, there are going to be opportunities for innovation across the spectrum of disposable and reusable devices as we look towards the future. Reusable devices offer unique benefits, but there are clearly trade-offs to navigate regardless of what route you go down. It's important to consider your sustainability goals early in the process and to factor in different use-related scenarios into any of that early analysis. Once you embark upon the journey of developing more sustainable devices, we covered 3 areas that we feel are important to consider early on in that process. Firstly, forewarned is forearmed. So like we discussed, intelligent approaches can help accelerate learnings from existing devices and use paradigms that are already out there in the world today. Secondly, systems thinking is critical. So analytical approaches can help you balance formulation, device and platform considerations early on in the process. And last but not least, don't leave adherence to chance. Behavioral science frameworks can guide design, and scientific research can help predict outcomes from your designs. So just a few final words on TTP. We've been working with pharma and medical device companies for over 35 years now to help them navigate these types of trade-offs early in the development of next-generation drug delivery devices. We've helped design and develop a broad range of devices over the years. This image shows where we live. It's TTP's campus and has been designed for collaboration, creativity and innovation. We work with clients from early concept right through to manufacturing transfer and scale up. The campus itself has been developed with sustainability central to the thinking, both its approach to preserving and supporting local ecology through to energy efficiency. We have air source heat pumps and 1,200 meters squared of solar panels saving around 212 tons of CO2 annually. It's a great place to work and a great place to visit. So if any of you are over in the UK, we'd love to welcome you onto the campus.